Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind, where we pursue wisdom on the paths between primary and secondary worlds. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Hey there, welcome back. Today we're going to be continuing our series on the fiction and philosophy of C.S. Lewis as I release some of the content that I put together for my independently run course in June or the summer of 2024. And so you can find some of these videos on YouTube. I'll get around to posting more of them at some point, but for now, I am going to be releasing them through the podcast feed on a weekly basis, starting with Out of the Silent Planet. And so you know what to expect for the next few episodes. We'll be starting with the Ransom series. We're going to go Out of the Silent Planet, Paralandra, Screwtape Letters, get into the justification for that another time, and then That Hideous Strength. And then after that, we'll do Till We Have Faces, The Great Divorce, and then the Chronicles of Narnia, each of the Chronicles of Narnia. And so that's where we'll be going with this study. And then we'll also be doing other things in between. In the next episode, we've got our next conversation from the book club on Augustine's Confessions as we get into books 5 and 6. And by the way, that book club is open to anybody. You can become a free level patron over at patreon.com/mythicmind, and you're welcome to jump into that study if you so desire. And I also want to remind you that we have, at this point, 3 Mythic Mind podcasts running. We've got this one, the main podcast, Mythic Mind, which focuses mostly on literature and philosophy. It's also a staging ground for testing out some other potential branches. And so we've branched off in 2 additional directions as far as the podcast goes. We have Mythic Mind Games, which takes a general Christian humanities perspective on video games, mostly conversation-based, although I do already have one solo episode, and I'll have some more of those here and there, but it's mostly panel-style conversation about video games, about how to approach them as an art form, how to get the most value out of them, as well as surely to discuss where they might go wrong. But our priority is to demonstrate where value is to be found in this medium of art, and how do we take the ideas that they communicate and latch them on to things that are maybe a little bit more substantial, a little bit deeper, philosophically, connections to other literary works and so forth. So far, we've done some things on Knights of the Old Republic, pulling off of some of our broader Star Wars stuff that we're doing right now this summer. We are currently doing a 2-parter on Red Dead Redemption 2. I already have one episode out there on Arthur Morgan and Tolstoy's The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And so you can listen to that right now. This Friday, we've got another conversation on Red Dead 2 coming out. And then after that, we've got a couple episodes on Zelda, which are going to be recorded this week and available on Patreon sooner rather than later. And so if you don't want to wait for that, then we'll become a patron at any level to get early and ad-free episodes of all that we do delivered into one single patron feed. And so we've got that going on. We also have the Mythic Mind Movies and Shows podcast, which is continuing our Star Wars series, looking at the Star Wars movies. You can find Empire Strikes Back over there right now. And so we're doing a lot of really interesting things here. Recommend that you subscribe to all these podcasts, or better yet, become a patron and get everything delivered into one single feed, early episodes, ad-free episodes, all for your convenience. I do this for you, and so hopefully you can do something for me and help to fund my efforts in deepening as well as expanding what Mythic Mind has to offer. The more that we grow, the more that I can bring to you, right? The more voices I can bring to you, the more cross-pollination of content expertise I can bring to you. So we're doing a lot of interesting things. Oh, and also I'm starting to revive my Substack. I'll link that in the show notes. My Substack, which is working through all of Tolkien's letters, one at a time, providing summaries and most importantly, some reflections on what Tolkien has to offer us in this insight into his mind, his life, his heart, his affection, his soul. I think that there's a lot of value to be had there, and so I'm starting to revive that. And I'm also, with that, going to get back into recording my reading of these articles that I'm posting. And so the recordings will be available to tier two patrons and higher, delivered through that same podcast feed. So again, just a little bit more content for you if you're at tier two or higher, and if you're at tier three or higher, you get all that, and then you also get access to all courses that begin within this term, which is the upcoming Plato Stoicism Until We Have Faces, the Elder Scrolls, and the Silmarillion. And so you can go ahead and join to get all of that. And that, again, all of that goes for tier three annual patrons. All right, but for now, I do want us to just get right into our series on the fiction and philosophy of C.S. Lewis with a short introduction to Out of the Silent Planet. The next video that we do in this series in a couple weeks from now will be on Out of the Silent Planet, be a bit more detail involved in that. But for now, let's go ahead and get to it. Hello and welcome back as we get ready to begin Out of the Silent Planet, the beginning of C.S. Lewis's so-called Space Trilogy. Now, I say so-called because, well, I suppose if you've read these stories before, you already know why I don't really like putting the word space on the label of this series. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, well, you will soon enough into Out of the Silent Planet. And so, instead, I tend to call this the Ransom trilogy or sometimes series, because even trilogy is a little bit misleading because, as we're going to find, there's good reason to include a fourth book in this series, and that would be Screwtape Letters, which we're actually going to read right after Paralandra before getting to That Hideous Strength, which I think will serve as a powerful study into the nature of evil, the nature of the demonic. But I don't want to say too much about the series or even too much about Out of the Silent Planet right now. And that's because I know that many of you are reading these stories for the first time, and I want to make sure that I'm not setting you up too well. I want there to be mystery for you. I want you to kind of struggle through the puzzles of kind of figuring out what is going on and kind of what it all means. And so, for that reason, this first video, as the introductory videos will tend to be, is going to be relatively short. And then at the end of the week, as we look back at where you've been, that's when we'll get more detailed. That's when we'll deal with more plot elements. But I want to make sure I shy away from that now. And in fact, as you'll recall in the last video where I introduced this entire course, I had to cut myself off because I felt like I was starting to prepare you a little bit too well for Out of the Silent Planet. And so what I want to do in this video is to just give you some very broad literary thematic ideas to kind of have in your mind as you go through the text. And I want to introduce you to some secondary reading that you might find helpful along the way. Now, I read three main texts that provide commentaries and analysis on the Ransom series, and each of them have some strengths and each of them have some weaknesses. Now, the first one that I read is called Deeper Heaven, and that is by Christina Hale. This is a really good text if you are not yet familiar with medieval cosmology, with the medieval view of the cosmos. It's really good if you're not very familiar with some of the more prominent literary influences that we see in this series, and especially the role of Dante in his Divine Comedy. And so she does a good job of laying out medieval view of the cosmos, good job of bringing in Dante and some of Lewis's other major literary influences. I do think that she gets Plato a little bit wrong, but I mean, that's relatively minor. Overall, I would definitely commend this book to you, Deeper Heaven by Christina Hale. The next book that I read is called Planets in Peril, and that is by David Downing. Now, this was my favorite of the secondary literature that I read. It does a really good job of looking at the Ransom series through different lenses, through a psychological lens, philosophy, theology, seeing how his life kind of relates thematically to some of what we see in these stories. And so Planets in Peril, I found this just to be a top-notch read. This is my favorite of the secondary literature that I read on the Ransom series. Now, next we have A Compass for Deep Heaven, and this is a compilation of essays edited by Diana Glyer and Julian Johnson. Now, this was a great read. It's, in my reckoning, a fairly introductory level read to Lewis's thought. And so if you haven't read widely in Lewis, you're not familiar with sort of how he thinks, his major themes, major emphases, the direction in which he goes, this is a good recommendation for you. And so Review: Deeper Heaven, really good for medieval cosmology, his major literary influences. Planets in Peril, good for really just looking at these series from an array of perspectives. This is what I feel like is the most dense reading and the most helpful for me. And then finally, Compass for Deep Heaven. This is good if you're not familiar widely with Lewis's thought. Now, as far as what Lewis himself has to say about topics related to the Ransom series, there are a few texts that might be helpful for you. Now, first and foremost, we have The Discarded Image, which is all about the medieval and Renaissance worldview through literature. Now, I will say that this text is very dense, but it's also very beautiful, despite the fact that it has an atrocious cover relative to the material. No idea why they went that route. But in any case, this really does survey an array of literature in the medieval Renaissance world to give you a sense of the lived world that they had. And so we're not just getting the philosophy. We're not just getting what people said about what they believed. We're really getting the expression of the medieval vision seen through literature. But like I said, this is very, very dense. And so if you get lost toward the beginning, what I recommend is just jumping ahead to section 5, which is about the heavens, right? This is when he specifically lays out the medieval view of the cosmos. That's what's going to be most relevant for our study. And that section, those few subchapters are going to be relatively easy to understand. And so if all you read is section 5 here on the heavens, as well as the following section on fairies, I think that this book will be worth your purchase, since that's The Discarded Image. Now, if you want to go a bit of a simpler route to very similar material, then you can pick up his compilation of essays called Studies in Medieval and Renaissance Literature. And specifically, his, chapter 3 here, or the third essay, called Imagination and Thought in the Middle Ages. That chapter, that essay, does a lot of what you're going to get in The Discarded Image, but on more of a popular level, not quite so many arcane literary references. And so that might be an easier route to go for you if you want something a little bit more immediately approachable. And so even if you bought this entire book just for that one chapter, I think that would be useful. And of course, there are a number of other chapters that are useful as well for other purposes. Now, next, and a collection that I particularly enjoy, in fact, this is one of my favorite collections of his essays. It's called Of Other Worlds. And this is a collection of his essays in which he goes into his philosophy on storytelling. He does some popular level literary criticism. And so if you've never read his literary criticism, you've never read his literary philosophy, this is a good entry point. Before getting into his more scholarly text, this is a good popular level presentation of really what I think is a profound philosophy of literature. And really all of this is going to be useful, but especially I would say essays 1 and 2, that's on stories, on 3 ways of writing for children, and then most specifically chapters or the essays 7 and 8 on science fiction, and then a reply to Professor Haldane. On science fiction, this is exactly what it sounds like. He talks about his philosophy of science fiction, how his stories that we're reading right now relate to others in the field. And then a reply to Professor Haldane is his response to a guy named Professor Haldane, who issued some criticisms of Lewis's science fiction, and so Lewis is providing a defense. And I'll talk more about that in the next video, but I don't think it would make sense for me to get into his defenses of things that you may not have read yet. And so we'll save that for next time. So again, that was The Discarded Image, Studies in Medieval Renaissance Literature, and Of Other Worlds. Now, we will return to medieval cosmos, things that I had started to talk about last time, but I want to get back to that probably in the next video, because again, I don't want to give you too much of a map to the story that you're about to read. But what I do think I want to do right now is to comment a little bit on Lewis's storytelling in general, getting into his philosophy of storytelling. So that way you kind of know how to approach, not just Out of the Silent Planet, but you know how to approach Lewis in general. You know what to look for. You know what you should be feeling what he's trying to pull you toward. And this is principally going to come from this collection of Other Worlds, which again gets into his literary philosophy. Now, On Stories, Lewis talks about how a good story isn't about surprise. It's not even really about the plot. Now, Lewis explains that a good story is one that cultivates moods that are associated with certain states of being. And this very much speaks to his Platonism. It very much speaks to his medievalism. Because remember, for Plato, every particular thing that we experience in this material world is in a state of flux. It's in a state of change. It's always becoming something else, which is another way of saying it never is what it claims to be fully. And so, we might see different cases of justice played out in the world around us. However, we can never look to one particular situation in this world and say that is justice itself. Well, no, that'd be ridiculous, because that would mean that other cases of justice aren't also justice. The fact that there can be multiple instantiations of justice means that justice itself is an ideal that stands above, that transcends any particular instantiation of justice, as like an echo stems from a fundamental reality at the beginning. And so too, the ideal is more real, is more true than the particular. And so just as with this mindset, you have humanity before you have a particular human. You have horseness before you have a particular horse. You have justice, you have virtue before you have any particular displays of justice or virtue. So too for Lewis, good literature has the ideal, has the state standing above and before the particular. And so the particulars, however, are the ones that are in process. It is the particulars that have a development of plot. It is the particulars that actually have a narrative. However, those particulars are nested within stable realities. And so we're going to see that as our protagonist, Dr. Ransom, goes through Malacandra, he's going to experience all these particular realities that continue to spiral upward until he comes to face the reality itself, or at least as close as he could possibly get to it. And then we're going to see this happen again in Perelandra, where he's going to experience all these particulars that speak to the reality itself that he will eventually encounter. And then we see this again in That Hideous Strength most profoundly, as we see this spiral of particulars that spirals upward to the fulfillment, not just of That Hideous Strength, but fulfillment of the entire series, and really in a very another way, the fulfillment of all things gets played out, as we get this upward spiral from the particulars up to being itself, reality itself. And, I said that this also speaks to his medievalism. The medievals recognize that all things, that existence itself ultimately comes from God and is directed back to God. And so the path of wisdom is ultimately the Godward journey. You are looking toward the light that illuminates all things. And this is why the medievals, people like Boethius, recognized that true fulfillment of human form, true fulfillment of the very form of being itself, is ultimately found in moving back to the source of all things, God himself. And when you have this Godward direction, well, that reverberates backwards, and you're able to recognize glory in all things, to the point where Boethius, falsely accused, awaiting his execution, is able to find freedom of soul, freedom of spirit. He's able to recognize that even where he is right then, amidst injustice, amidst imprisonment, is still good. As Socrates says, you can never do harm to a good man, because if you are directed toward goodness, if you are identified with goodness itself, well then there's no external force, there's no particular that can actually take that away from you. And so wisdom is found in direction toward being itself, which is the ultimate stability, right? That is the beatific vision, that we would behold God in his glory, and that would then reflect back into our soul in the fullness of joy and in the completion of our purpose. And so these ideas are very much going to be seen at play in the Ransom series, as Ransom, and we, along with him, are brought up through a spiral of particular events in order to find being itself. And so we need to recognize that this is no ordinary adventure story. This is very much a story like Dante's Divine Comedy. And in fact, as we'll talk a little bit more about in the next video as we look back, there are some pretty clear parallels between Dante and Ransom. And in fact, we're going to see right at the opening of Out of the Silent Planet that Ransom isn't even introduced with his name. He's initially introduced as a pedestrian, very much similar to Dante's Pilgrim. Pilgrim and pedestrian both being travelers. And so Ransom and we along with him are going to be taken along this cosmic journey as we move from the mundane up into the heavens and then have the heavens move into the mundane. Or perhaps a better way of saying that is we come to recognize that the mundane and the heavens were always intertwined. But we've spent too long being catechized by our silent planet to hear the angelic choirs. All right, so that gives you some vague things to keep in mind. Next time we will get more into the details, but that's it for now. I look forward to speaking with you soon. Please participate in the Discord channel. Let me know what your questions are. Let me know what you're interested in. That will help me shape the live conversations. I really want to make sure that those conversations do what is most profitable for you. And so again, please participate in the Discord channel. Let me know what you're thinking. Let me know what stands out to you. Let me know what your questions are. I hope that you enjoy this journey through the heavens to Malacandra and back again, whether this is your first time or you are taking another trip among the stars. Until next time, Godspeed. All right. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching if you're going out through YouTube. I really enjoy the things that we're doing with Mythic Mind, but I can only keep up this pace and increase this pace, which is what I really would like to do, right? I would like to provide weekly episodes of the games podcast, the movies podcast, this podcast. I would love to just do everything, right? But I need more funding if I'm going to turn my attention away from some other things that pay the bills. And so go to patreon.com/mythicmind in order to lend your support and become an active part of this community. Get all this stuff delivered into one feed, early and ad-free, and just generally support the things that we are doing. All right, well, that's it for now. I look forward to seeing you again, or at least having you see me again, over on the Mythic Mind Games podcast, which will be the next thing to come out from us, and that'll be on Friday. All right, until then, Godspeed. I have always, at least ever since I can remember, had a kind of longing for death. It was when I was happiest that I longed most. It was on happy days when we were up in the hills, the three of us, with the wind and the sunshine, where you couldn't see Gloam or the palace. Do you remember? The color and the smell, and looking across at the gray mountain in the distance. And because it was so beautiful, it set me longing, always longing. Somewhere else there must be more of it. Everything seemed to be saying, Psyche, come. But I couldn't come, and I didn't know where I was to come to. It almost hurt me. I felt like a bird in a cage when the other birds of its kind are flying home. And now I will make answer to you, O my judges, and show that he who has lived as a true philosopher has reason to be of good cheer when he is about to die, and that after death he may hope to receive the greatest good in the other world. For I deem that the true disciple of philosophy is likely to be misunderstood by other men. They do not perceive that he is ever pursuing death and dying. And if this is true, why, having had the desire of death all his life long, should he regret the arrival of that which he has always been pursuing and desiring? The longing of Plato and the control of the Stoics pervades Lewis's retelling of the Cupid and Psyche myth until we have faces. With this incredible novel, which he believed to be his best, Lewis demonstrates the tensions in ancient thought and, even more significantly, the limits of rational philosophy, which can only go as deep as the foxes can dig. Beyond that, under that, and providing the life of that thought, we find the dark and holy places that blind our faculties of reason. What then shall we do? This is a topic that we will explore after first surveying some important philosophical contributions in the ancient world that have had some significant bearing on Lewis's great novel. To this end, we will begin with Plato's Phaedo, which discusses the immortality of the soul and what those who love wisdom might expect in the life to come. And then we will spend 4 weeks with some of the great Stoics, including Epictetus, Emperor Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca. Finally, we will turn our attention to Till We Have Faces for the final 2 weeks with original content, and so this will not be the same as what you may have seen in the Fiction and Philosophy of C.S. Lewis course. Each week of this 8-week study will include readings from primary sources that will be provided as PDFs, although these are all texts that belong in your personal library. You'll be provided with recommendations for secondary readings, you'll have recorded presentations for you to watch at your leisure, ongoing Discord chats, and weekly live meetings to discuss the readings. Enroll today by going to patreon.com/mythicmind and checking out the shop, or you can gain access to all courses, past, present, and future this year by purchasing a Tier 3 annual subscription. I hope to see you there.